Welcome back, AP. Yeah, so we left off talking in class about life in urban society during the 19th century, right? So we're basically like in the 1850s, 1870s, okay? And we're talking about like the second industrial revolution, like this idea where it's like how the industrial revolution is going to continue to roll forward. And some historians argue that it never actually ended at all. But we're also going to kind of continue forward discussing like how the Industrial Revolution has affected the lives of common people. Now, some European history teachers are like, well, it didn't affect them that much. The poor were still poor. And, like, that's true, but, like, daily life was drastically affected starting around 1850, right? So, like, right around the time of the Great Exhibition in Great Britain, right, when the Crystal Palace was built to try and show off the new abilities of the government as well as the new inventors and scientists and Smith & Wesson's new Colt revolver and all that fun stuff. So it's just going to drastically be changing. And this guy is a big advocate for that change, right? This is Jeremy Bentham. We started talking about him in class, right? He is the advocate for utilitarianism, right? Do the most good for the most people at once, all right? Also, the freedoms of everything. Freedom of this, freedom of that, freedom of women in this, freedom of men in that, freedom of, like, it doesn't matter. If you want to do it, go do it, all right? So the fun part about him is how he willed his body to science, all right? So we were talking about this in class about how, like, he wanted his body to be dissected and donated to science so it could aid the scientific community. And then he wanted, after they were done with it, some form of mummification done to his body so it could be on constant display and so he could be voting for university activities. They would call him, like, basically, like, in absentia, or like some kind of weird phrase that basically meant he was there but he couldn't vote because he is dead. Like, so they took a skeleton and padded it with hay, all right? So this is the skeleton padded with hay. And they took some riding gloves and put those on his hands, so it didn't look like weird and gross. Nobody wants to see like skeleton fingers. It's weird. Or like scarecrow fingers. Now, some of you are immediately noticing the big glaring weirdness though. They're like, why does his face look so perfect? Well, his face looked super, super perfect because of a different reason we'll get into in a second. But a big part of the reason why he decided to do this in the first place was because of growing popularity of a job called resurrection men. These people known as body snatchers would actually go into graveyards, right, dig up fresh dead bodies and sell them to medical colleges for a nice little fee, right? Or not a fee, but a nice profit for themselves, all right? I got to go grab my phone off the couch, but I'm going to keep talking, all right? So when they would do this, they would actually go into these graveyards, grab these bodies, sell them to medical colleges as a way to help circumvent their income, right? Well, Jeremy Bentham decides to help out a little bit by donating his body to science, which makes you a really good guy, all right? Now, utilitarianism, greatest possible good for the greatest number of people. What if they discover how to fix something in his body, right? But then something went wrong, all right? So, because here's the thing. If they're going to dissect and chop his body up and do all this other stuff, he's very aware that, like, the fleshy part of his body is just going to be kind of out the window, right? Like, it's going to be done. They're going to have to pitch it out because they're going to chop it up into a bajillion little pieces. But keep the skeleton. It's dope. And he said in his will, the one part of his body he wanted, like, specifically taken care of was his noggin, right? That noggin you just saw on that mummy that's in that glass case now currently at the College of London is actually a wax replica. Dun, dun, dun. It is a wax replica because, well, the one real thing is his hair. That's his actual hair. His actual, like, pieces of his hair are actually right there. That's actually some of his hair. Now, anyway, I'm moving on past his hair. They had to do that because this is what happened when they tried to mummify his head. All right, so that's Jeremy Bentham's severed head. This is going on the list of things, the famous body parts in my room. We just got to decide where. So that right there is Jeremy Bentham's severed, mummified head, right? You can see where they took a lot of the hair off the top to create the wig for the wax head, and that is so gross. The eyeballs aren't real. They're glass replicas or wooden replicas, one of the two. I can never remember which one. But what ended up happening is they tried to do this new mummification technique because they had recently discovered, like, some mummies at high altitudes, right? So they were like, oh, how do we simulate high altitudes? Well, we'll use sulfur to kind of, like, take care of the skin, and then we're going to put it underneath a vacuum chamber, and we're going to suck all the air out like it would be at a high altitude, and we'll let it mummify itself. Well, like what ended up happening is it turned a very gross, purpley. Like I'm pretty confident that that itself is actually another replica. No, I think that's bad. Like Jeremy Bentham. Let's make sure. Head. All right, so yeah, there he is. That's his actual legit severed head, which is now kept under lock and key, right? So that is his noggin. That's the one right there. That's a better picture. I think the other one's also a replica as well. I think that's a replica. That's dumb. What am I doing? All right, so that's his real head. That's gross, right? Well, it's because they had discovered these Peruvian, remember the Incan mummies that we looked at? They had discovered those, and they were like, well, we'll redesign mummification this way. It didn't work, and now it's kept under lock and key. Some of you are like, well, Mr. Terry, what's kept under lock and key? Who's going to try and steal a severed head? Well, apparently, after it ended up in this new university, they would store it laying on the ground between his legs so you could see the head itself, right? It became the subject of college pranks. Fraternities would go in there and try to steal it regularly. And due to the fact that people kept trying to take it as a prank, they had to lock it up. So Jeremy Bentham's head is now under lock and key because of the Animal House kind of kids, right? So then you have this guy come along with the worst hairline that I think anybody has ever seen. Jules and I were talking about this on ooh, that's a comb over for sure. There's no way anybody's hair goes that far back. But he's still very important. His name is Edwin Chadwick, right? Edwin Chadwick was an English government official charged with this case called pauper relief, all right? This came on the heels of a cholera outbreak in 1846, all right? So you know what cholera is? Cholera is a contaminated waterborne illness that basically causes amoebic dysentery-like results to where you either regurgitate or defecate so much to a point that your body dries up and dies, right? So Edwin Chadwick was in charge of this thing called pauper relief because of this big outbreak, right? Well, he realized that the death of a wage earner crushed a family, right? So to make economies more self-sufficient, you got to keep these family members alive. So what are we going to do? We're going to ward off disease, right? He was one of the first people to realize that removing human poop from people's homes is 1/20th cheaper by sewer than it is to do it the way they were doing it. So the way they were doing, look, you can kind of, it looks like I'm Jeremy Bentham now. Now, anyway, so the thing about it is, in those back-to-back homes, they had an outhouse, right? We're talking about outhouses and how gross they are and stuff like that in class, right? So these 20 ridiculous numbers of people. I think it's something ridiculous. 200 people would share one outhouse, right? So the human waste would be overflowing. Some people even tried to actually make money off their own human excrement by selling it as fertilizer, all right? So this became a huge issue because you've got human waste just sitting out in your backyard or possibly in city squares where kids are then playing with dead rats as a form of entertainment. So Edwin Chadwick says, iron pipes and tiles are cheap, so why don't we just make a sewage system like the Romans did? And then for 1,000 years later, Europe finally gets on the plumbing game, right? So sewage systems were the answer. Cholera breaks out in 1846. His report becomes the basis of health law in 1848, right? So sanitary systems are going to advance. No more selling your own poop for fertilizer. Don't any of y'all get any ideas, all right? I know Denny had a moldy bread business construct there for a minute after we talked about the Great Fear, but no one is allowed to sell their own defecate, all right? Now, these ideas are going to spread across the continent and beyond. Sewage systems are going to pop up, and death rates are going to begin to decline. Remember when we talked about industrialization on the continent? As sewage systems on Chadwick's idea begin to proliferate all over the continent, look at the rate of death and how it plummets, all right? Some people are like, oh, overpopulation is caused by sewer systems. I'll take it. And we're like, all right, I will take it. I don't need all of that, all right? So now we got some other really, really important figures to talk about. People that you actually interact with their products every single day. There we go. Now, I'll move when I get to Lister here in a second. Now, Big one coming forward, this is all still a part of that bacterial revolution, right? This is all part of that Chadwick, Bentham era idea of being a utilitarian, help the biggest number of people as possible, be a big thinker, change the game, right? Big one going forward, Louis Pasteur, all right? French, 1822 to 1895. That's not that important. You don't even need to write that down. You just need to write down the fact that, like, his accomplishments. Mid-1850s, he's going to invent the process of pasteurization, right? He was hired to come in and try and figure out how to keep beer in a brewery from going bad so quickly. Well, then he realized upon studying this beer that the reason why it goes bad is because there are literal living organisms inside of beer and milk, right? And the way to kill them, to prevent them from growing so quickly and spoiling the product, is to heat it to kill the bacteria. What he's going to do in doing this is he basically discovers germs. That's insane, right? He is the first person to theorize the idea of we can now create medicines to attack these little biologic things that live on us, right? And people like criticized him big time. They were like, no, you idiot. Spontaneous generation is still correct. Spontaneous generation is the theory that came before Pasteur. Spontaneous generation was the idea that basically fleas were the byproduct of unhealthy conditions, right? That they just arrived on top of rats, all right? Like, so that they just were like, hello, I'm here now. All right, so down, and then like would bite people and spread disease, right? That was the small thing that actually spread sickness. People believed at one point that maggots were a result of rotting meat. Not that flies landed on them and laid eggs and then made babies, but that maggots came from spoiled meat. So he's going to prove this idea of spontaneous generation completely wrong. He's going to pioneer new vaccines. He's going to cure chicken cholera, which is awesome. All right, so, and then it's like, that's great stuff, because the only kind of medicine you could have for cholera before this was just opium derivatives to try and decrease the swelling and the pain, and also get really messed up and possibly be addicted to drugs for the rest of your life. Now, germ theory is going to be the thing that he spawns, right? It's the idea that disease is caused by the spread of tiny living organisms that can be controlled, right? If we can figure out how to stop them, then we can control them. And then another guy pops up, and his name's Robert Koch, right? Robert Koch is going to be he's a German, and he learns to grow and culture bacteria, leading to the development of vaccines for diphtheria, typhoid, typhus, cholera, yellow fever, right? Like like these guys are ridiculously groundbreaking individuals, right? So Robert Koch actually, when he originally tried to grow bacteria, he tried doing it on potato slices. But then he noticed that the nutrients are not actually sufficient enough to grow them at a systematic rate. So he decided to try and make nutrient-rich gelatins to so the bacteria could grow on its own. And then he discovered that individual bacteria grow in individual ways. So diphtheria bacteria grows like diphtheria bacteria. Typhoid bacteria grows like typhoid bacteria. So now we can develop vaccines to stop these things. Now we don't have, child mortality is not going to be such an issue anymore, because scarlet fever on the heels of this is going to be cured, right? Like a lot of different things. And then you got Joseph Lister, Englishman, who realizes that we got to keep wounds from getting infected, right? He comes up with this idea of antiseptics and sterilization. Remember poor Lord Byron died from unsterilized tools? If only Lister had got to him first, right? So Lister realized that if you take an antiseptic, and then sepsis is actually when bacteria basically create small holes in your body because of rotting and contaminated flesh. So to be antiseptic is to treat it with materials that actually kill that bacteria, right? But he's, of course, the third in line off these other two guys that came before him. So he realized that, oh, well, these things are probably coming from the air, right? Like, that's the only way they're getting there. If Pasteur and Koch realized that there's these little things floating around that we can't even see, the way that we can actually stop them is by taking gauze, right, wrappings, dipping them in an antiseptic, wrap it around the surface, and it'll keep it from getting infected, and you'll actually stay healthy, right? So, and then sterilization. Clean those tools before you cut somebody open. How about that? All right, so a monumental discovery. Some of you are like, how did these Nimrods not know this in the first place? I don't know. Don't ask me. When you got ideas like spontaneous generation running around and Galen thinks that the four humors are what keeps you alive, I don't. Ew, gross. There's a piece of food inside my coffee cup. Oh, it's a piece of rice. That's weird. Probably. I like how I just talked about unhealthy standards and I just picked a whole piece of food out of my coffee cup. Now, anyway, so we talked about this as well. Now we're going to talk about, or we talked about like the bacterial revolution, people becoming healthy and more clean. Now we're talking about urban planning and public transportation. All right, so this era is kind of groundbreaking. Like everything you know and love is actually from this era, right? So we talked about Napoleon III for a hot second, right? He is the nephew of the great Napoleon Bonaparte. Yeah, I said it, the great Napoleon Bonaparte. He was democratically elected as president, and as being the first democratically elected person off the heels of the revolution in 1848 in France, what he's going to do is decide, as my first mission, I'm going to try and use public projects to aid, employ, and help the poor. He basically sets the foundation of the welfare state, right? Which I know some of y'all just like your skin curled, but it's a good thing, all right? It's a very good thing because, quite frankly, without Napoleon III and some efforts like of leaders like him, poop removal brought to you by leaders like Napoleon III. Now, we'd all be like basically looking at crap flowing down the streets. That's disgusting. Now, what he does though is he decides to turn to this really, 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 really intense, really, really, really obnoxious Alsatian known as Baron George Haussmann. All right, so some of you are like, whoa, he's got a French first name and a German last name. It's because he's from Alsace. All right, Alsace and Lorraine are these two little like areas on the like border of France and Germany where they are very culturally diffused, and like at any point your neighbor could speak German or French, right? So, but he's Alsatian. All right, so he's a government official appointed to this project of aiding, employing, and helping the welfare state. What he decides to do is, off the studies of all these new groundbreaking people like Chadwick and Bentham and Pasteur, he looks at Paris and he's like, all of our problems are really basically because we live in these medieval cities. You know what I mean? Like we live in these cities that their grids haven't changed since 1290. So we need to change this, right? So let's rebuild France, all right? Now, when I say France, I mean Paris. I don't mean like rebuild the entire country. That's ridiculous. But he's responsible for the Paris that you know now, all right? He destroyed old buildings to create huge, broad, tree-lined streets to create better flow for traffic, right? Demolished slums and old fortress walls to create ring boulevards, right? So if you go to Paris, there's this giant ringed road that goes all the way around the city center, right? And that could be the Champs-Elysees. I need to, let me double check that. Champs-Elysees. No, Champs-Elysees. Wait, ooh. Yep, the Champs-Elysees. All right, so anyway, now, he actually creates the Champs-Elysees. Oh, we talked about this, Haley, like now. So he creates the Champs-Elysees, right, which actually used to be a giant medieval wall. All right, so that's right. He demolished the wall to create a beautiful boulevard that actually goes the perimeter of the entire Paris, like, infrastructure. There's a beautiful one as well. Oh, the Leopold's projects in Vienna, and go to Vienna. Just go. All right, they have the same exact thing though, because these things, these ring boulevards, are actually going to create a better infrastructure, right? And along these ring boulevards are going to be museums and opera houses and theaters and cultural like meccas, and he's going to create parks and open areas. He actually had two gigantic parks actually built. So Central Park, right? Like actually 1.5 of those was how big the city of Paris was and how densely populated it was at this time before he got a hold of it, right? So, and these two huge parks he's going to have one built on the really, really wealthy west side, and he's going to have one built on the really, really poor east side, right? So that, like, holidays can be celebrated, and you can have Bastille Day, like, celebrations in these big parks and communal areas. Big open areas, sewers, aqueducts to bring in fresh water so you're not getting cholera water, public transportation by horse carts. But by 1890, that changed to the electric streetcar. Like Haussmann, you're the man, all right? So even though you got run out of Paris by a bunch of turds, like, you're still the man, okay? And this is him, just looking super pensive. And for a guy losing his hair, he's doing it well. I wish I could be like that. All right. So, but yeah, that's Haussmann himself, because this is what Paris looked like before he got a hold of it, right? So before he got a hold of it, look how densely packed it is. The streets are crazy narrow. The roads are crazy narrow. Like, there are slums everywhere, like shanty towns, right? This is what, like, it would look like. You could possibly have to cross a canal. That this is probably full of human waste, right? Like, so, but that's what it looked like when you're trying to get around Paris. And this is a picture of the Revolution of 1848. Another big reason, jot this down, why Baron de Haussmann was so successful. His reform projects of the city infrastructures are going to make it so you can't throw up barricades as fast. And also so you could have giant military parades, right? Like, show the glory of your country by having a giant military parade down the Champs-Elysees or down, like, one of the, like, Rue de la Croix. The Rue de la Croix. Like, so now, anyway, but no barricades, big military parades. I used to have a buddy in college that used to drive me insane because he was so hyper-socialist. And he was like, the way they designed Paris is just so they could have big military parades. I'm like, yeah, but also just parades, period. You know, like, so, and also I don't like stepping in human crap when I'm walking to go to the market. How about that? But this is some of what it looks like after he actually, that's the Champs-Elysees. Yeah, like, so this is actually going around it. And you can see, like, advertisements. And, other really cool fact, all of the buildings, if you go to Europe, basically any major European city, they all look like this now, right? Tree-lined boulevards. All the buildings are also the same height, right? Building buildings that are all different heights is a very American thing, right? Like, we're big fans of that. We're like, hey, bigger. All right, so, like, that's very, very us, right? Whereas in Europe at the time, during the 1850s, it was much more along the lines of cream facades, similar balconies, light touches, same height. All right, so also a big thing that even happened in Italy. And it would create these giant little, like, meeting points, and this became like the era of the new social lifestyle. Like, this is the city now, not that original one that looked absolutely terrible. All right, hold on, my wife's calling me. I gotta tell her I'm flipping really quick. So, and this is the Paris you know now. We're gonna, like, kind of wrap it up, right? We're just gonna wrap it up here because the next kind of phases we're getting into are stuff we're going to be able to talk about in class, right? We won't have a warm-up on Monday because we're going to just get straight into it. We're going to bang this entire chapter out in literally, like, 3 days, all right? So, because we got to talk about some fun stuff next, like women's fashion we're talking about next, and, like, the division of social classes and sports, like entertainment, things like that. So I'm excited to talk about that with you guys. So I'll see you guys on Monday, and have a great rest of your weekend.